Your path has intersected with some of the most powerful institutions and political figures in Massachusetts history. You were a summer intern for Ted Kennedy, graduated from Harvard, you worked for John Kerry's presidential campaign. How did these experiences shape you?
You know, growing up in Indiana, there was kind of a mystique to Boston and to that world. When I had the chance to come to school in the area and to be able to work for extraordinary people, also a chance to work at the JFK Library. It's actually how I got my lunch money as a freshman. Was I had an internship there. And almost felt as though in a very distant way I were working for President Kennedy. And I think those experiences just connected me to Boston very much, but also made me realize that we all live as part of this bigger tradition that we can learn a lot from. And I think it was in the back of my head, even as I thought about military service years before doing it, learning about how some of these people that I had worked for or learned about, from President Kennedy to Senator Kerry, had served at a time when it was kind of a matter of course that no matter what your background was, you would consider serving the country.
You have the military experience, you have the executive experience, you are a mayor of a major city, but you're also 37 years old.
That's right.
And you're in a field of 20 plus Democrats taking on a president with his highest approval ratings at a time when the economy is strong. Why not run for governor of Indiana, wait a few years, and then get into the presidential race?
Well, I don't believe in running for an office so that you can run for some other office someday. I think you make yourself useful where you are. And I'll admit that it's surprising to everybody, including me, that things have shaped up in our country to the moment where a young mayor from the Midwest could be the answer to where we are nationally. But I think one of the reasons why somebody like me is running ahead of most Democratic competitors, even though they've been much more established in Washington and had more years of putting together a national network to run for president, is that America really does want and need something very different. Yes, you need experience, and that's where my executive experience and military experience come in. But I think a lot of Americans are looking outside Washington right now, and I think a lot of Democrats are on the lookout for somebody who can win, somebody who can win in places that have struggled to connect with our party, like the industrial Midwest where I'm from, and somebody who represents as far away as we can get from the current president. And I think not only in terms of ideas, but in terms of background and in terms of style, I'm pretty much the opposite of what we've got right now in the White House.
But he wasn't of Washington either.
That's true, and I think part of how he got here was that there's a sense that Democrats and Republicans have let us down. It goes to that economic issue. You know, the top line numbers look great, the stock market and the GDP, but what does it mean to have the GDP going up if life expectancy is going down? And I would argue that for the entire time I've been alive, that famous rising tide has been rising, but most of the boats didn't budge. And people are angry at anything that appears to be associated with the establishment or the system. If we look like we are offering more of the same, if the Democratic Party is portrayed once more as the party of the system, the party of the establishment, I think we run the risk of losing again, even though this president is unpopular. We've got to demonstrate that we understand that there's an accelerating pace of disruptive change in our country. Some of the forces that, again, where I come from, threw so many people out of work in manufacturing, but it's bigger even than that. If we don't get on top of these changes and make them work for all of us, then we're going to continue to see whoever promises that they're going to burn the house down do very well in politics. And I think that's how we got to where we are right now, with a president who, under ordinary circumstances, would never have been able to come even within cheating distance of winning the Oval Office.
You have described yourself as an openly gay, Maltese-American, Episcopalian veteran, but you don't like political labels, left, right, center. So how would you describe yourself politically?
Well, I consider myself a progressive. Another way I talk about it is that I'm a democratic capitalist. I believe that markets only work for people if it's in the framework of the rule of law. And while everybody tries to pin you on a left to right spectrum, in the course of making it very clear where I stand on every issue, I also hope people understand that I'm not looking to get constrained by these ideological labels that in many cases America has left behind. Where I live in Indiana, for example, there are actually a lot of people who voted for Barack Obama and Donald Trump, and voted for Mike Pence for governor, and voted for me for mayor. So what that tells you is there's more to the story than just being on the left-right spectrum. That being said, if anybody wants to know where I stand, I believe in universal health care. I believe in quality public education. I believe in making sure that we have humane treatment of people across the country, including at the borders. I think climate action and racial equality are imperative. But again, I think these are things that most Americans believe are the right thing to do. They're looking for leadership to actually make it happen.
So I want to go through a few issues as quickly as I can. First, you just touched on healthcare. Medicare for all who want it. That's what you support. What does that mean?
What it means is that we take a version of Medicare, we make it available as a kind of option on the exchanges. And then if people like me are right, that public option will be more cost effective and more attractive than any of the corporate options out there, more and more people will buy into it, and it becomes a glide path to that Medicare for all environment we've been talking about. But it's also daring the corporate world one last time to see if they can come up with anything better or fairer than they did before. Because if they do, that's the only way they can compete. I believe that in the end we will wind up with universal health care, but I should point out that even then, we can still have private insurance. Even in countries that have outright socialized medicine, there's often still a secondary market for private care and insurance. The important thing, though, is that for the basics of our lives, for being able to have health care without going bankrupt, we can no longer allow Americans to be left to the mercies of the corporate system and expect to get a better result than we've had.
So keep private insurers, but force them to be more innovative and more competitive.
Yes, and present a public option that I expect will eventually become the preferred option for all Americans.
This week you launched the Douglas Plan, which is designed to address systemic racism and inequality. You raise more money than any Democrat in the second quarter. You're consistently polling in the top 5, but your support with African Americans is low. How can you convince black voters that the Douglas Plan is more than just a theoretical paper or a wish list?
Well, one of the reasons that I've put forward the most comprehensive plan for Black America in the Democratic field is to answer just that question. Black voters have frankly felt taken for granted by our party and lied to by both parties. And it's why I think we have to go beyond just describing the problem. Yes, it's important to lay out all of the ways in which our system is unequal in everything from health and education to criminal justice, largely because of systemic racism. We also got to explain what we're going to do about it. And the Douglas Plan includes everything from mechanisms to support entrepreneurship with minority ownership to ways we can root out the racism that still persists in our healthcare system, to making sure our criminal justice system actually delivers justice with less incarceration, an elimination of things like the cash bail that has so many people pre-incarceration locked up without a conviction, and an end to the death penalty. I believe that we can and must do these things in our time because racial inequality runs the risk of really unraveling the entire American project. And the other thing that I want voters to understand is all of us need to deliver on this. All of us will be better off when we live in a country where a black driver and a white driver feels the exact same thing when they see a police officer approaching, and that is a feeling of safety, not one of fear.
More than 20 Democrats in the race. Does that hurt all of you?
I think it's actually pretty healthy right now to see the full range of ideas, opinions, personalities that the Democratic Party can put forward. But there will come a time when we all have to come together. And the 23 or so people who are not going to be the nominee need to rally around the one person who is. We learned this the hard way in 2016, and it is so important as we go about this campaign that each of us run a campaign that models the country that we want to lead. I'm determined that you'll be able to see what my presidency will be like by looking at how my campaign is conducted. And one thing we're determined to demonstrate is that we're not like the others.
We've had first ladies in the White House forever. If you're elected president, what would Chasten be?
First gentleman is what we call it in South Bend, so I think we'll probably go with that. And he's a great first gentleman in our city. You know, he got more than he bargained for. When he was dating me, I was already mayor, and we had to figure this out. There was no precedent for this in Indiana. We decided to just kind of be like any other couple and invite people to treat us that way, and that's exactly what happened. And even in a socially conservative community like my Indiana hometown, what we found is people evaluated me based on the job I was doing for them, and got to know Chasten as this wonderful person who can light up a room and let people know that they're important, and do all of the things that you really rely on a political spouse to do. He's been a huge part of this campaign too, helping us extend our reach, and leaning on his own background as an arts educator to help people understand the values that are part of our family. And I think he'll do a great job in the White House too.
So a couple really quick questions and then I'll let you go. First paying job.
I used to dog sit in the neighborhood, so that was probably the first honest paying job I had. When the neighbor left, I'd be walking these two basset hounds with pretty fierce wills, and I learned a lot about the limits of human control, wrangling those bassets.
Dogs always win. First car.
Well, I had my parents' Buick LeSabre to drive when I was in high school. First car I bought outright was a Taurus. It was with me until a couple of years ago. Kind of a tungsten green, not the most fashionable car, but it got me where I was going.
Moment that you decided to enter this race for president?
Did a final gut check, I think around the Thanksgiving holiday, and the biggest conversation, of course, was with Chasten. If your spouse is not on board, it's not going to go well. But also thinking about whether this was really the way I could do the most good, whether this was where I belonged. Every decision I made about running for office, and every decision I've made to not run for office, has been about looking at what I bring to the table, looking at what the moment calls for and what the office needs. And we're living in probably the only moment in American history when it really does make sense for somebody like me in a position like this to be seeking the presidency. But it's the uniqueness of this moment that calls me to step up.
Last question. I know you lost your dad earlier this year, and I'm sorry about that. You also, in about the last 14 months, wrote a book, got married, and launched a presidential campaign. What grounds you?
My marriage definitely grounds me because, that's about us and how we take care of each other, even with all of the noise going on. We got a couple of dogs at home. A rescue puggle. He's came to us about 4 years old. He's on a weight loss journey. He's a one-eyed puggle who's just wonderful. And then we got this other dog who has a very different personality. And they don't care if I'm running for president. They don't care how much money we raise. They don't care what's in the polls. They just want to know I'm going to feed them and walk them. And so little can keep you more grounded than having a creature in your life who just couldn't care less what you're doing in your day job.
Excellent. Well, Mayor Pete, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.